There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like erasure. The narcissist doesn't fear losing you. They fear losing control of how you see yourself. At first, it looks like love. They mirror your every thought, your values, your humor, until you start mistaking their reflection for connection. You think you've found your match, but what you've really found is a mirror built to feed on your light. Carl Jung warned about this kind of illusion. He said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But when one of those personalities is hollow, when it is only a persona, a mask without a self, the only thing transformed is you. You begin to feel it slowly. Every word you speak bends toward them like light, toward a black hole. Every victory becomes their triumph. Every wound becomes your fault. You shrink, not because they told you to, but because silence keeps you safe. At first, you call it compromise, then patience, then love. But what you're really learning is containment. How to exist in a room where only one person is allowed to feel. You learn to smile when you're breaking, to say it's okay when it isn't. You start apologizing for things you didn't do, for existing too loudly, for feeling too deeply, for seeing too clearly. Jung described this process as psychic infection, when another's unconscious begins to invade your psychic field. You start carrying emotions that aren't yours, their anger, their shame, their emptiness. You confuse absorption with empathy, thinking that understanding their pain will somehow save you both. But there's a reason. Narcissists are drawn to empaths like moths to flame. They need reflection to survive. Their entire reality depends on mirrors, on how others respond, admire or fear them. And you, the empath, provide the perfect mirror, clear, responsive, forgiving. Jung called this projection what we refuse to face in ourselves. We cast upon others. The narcissist projects their inner chaos into you, then blames you for it. You become the scapegoat for their shadow, the part of their psyche they cannot bear to confront. And without realizing it, you start living inside their unconscious. You begin questioning your memory. Did I really say that? You start doubting your perception. Maybe I'm too sensitive. You edit your truth before it leaves your mouth. That is the mark of possession, when another's shadow has taken residency in your psyche. And yet, there's a twisted comfort in this chaos. You think, if I can just love them enough, they'll finally see me. But Jung would say, you are not trying to save them. You are trying to save the part of yourself that once wasn't seen. That's why it hurts so deeply. Because it's not just about them. It's about you, reliving an old wound through someone who profits from it. You call it destiny, but it's really repetition. You call it loyalty, but it's really fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of being invisible again, fear that without their chaos, you'll feel nothing at all. But this is the secret. The narcissist's world is sustained only by reaction. They need your voice to echo their emptiness. They need your light to outline their shape. They need your compassion to hide their cruelty. Every time you explain yourself, you feed the illusion. Every time you defend yourself, you deepen the bond. Every time you try to make them understand, you descend further into the labyrinth they built to keep you lost, until one day the exhaustion becomes sacred. You wake up and realize this isn't love anymore. It's survival. That moment, that quiet, terrifying moment is the soul's first whisper. Withdraw. Jung called it the first movement of individuation, when the self begins to separate from the unconscious field that once held it hostage. You don't leave in anger. You don't leave in noise. You simply stop performing. You stop reacting. You stop giving energy to the machine that runs on your attention. And that's when the narcissist begins to panic. Because your silence isn't absence, it's power. It's the withdrawal of supply. The one thing they cannot manufacture on their own. In that stillness, you become something they cannot control. A mirror that no longer reflects. This is the agony they cannot name, the terror of being unseen. For a narcissist, being ignored is annihilation. And for you, it is the first breath of freedom. You don't yet know it, but this is the beginning of your rebirth. The turning of your light inward, back toward the self that remembers who you are. The empath's quiet exit is not an act of surrender. It's the moment the soul stops bleeding for someone else's hunger and begins to feed on its own truth. The narcissist's world runs on reflection they do not see. They only look for mirrors. Every glance, every response, every flicker of emotion in your eyes tells them who they are. Without that feedback, they collapse. Carl Jung called this the inflation of the persona, when someone becomes completely identified with the mask they show to the world. The narcissist's mask is flawless, radiant, superior, but behind it lies the one thing they cannot face: emptiness. When you meet them, you don't meet a person. You meet a performance, and your empathy becomes their stage light. They shine not because they are whole, but because you are watching. That's why your silence terrifies them. Your quiet exit is not just loss, it's exposure. Because when you no longer mirror their importance, their false self begins to disintegrate. Without your light, the mask starts to crack, revealing the hollow space beneath. Jung wrote that everything unconscious in us will appear in our lives as fate. For the narcissist, you were fate the mirror their psyche conjured to avoid facing its own darkness. They projected their inner emptiness onto you, made you responsible for filling it, and called it love. But in truth, you were never a partner. You were a projection screen for a broken image. This is the mirror dynamic, the energetic loop that traps both the empath and the narcissist. You give them reflection. They give you illusion. They feed on admiration. You feed on purpose. Both remain disconnected from reality, orbiting around an absence neither dares to name. You believed that if you loved them deeply enough, they would finally see you. But Jung would say, what you really wanted was for them to see themselves, to wake up from the dream of control and meet you in consciousness. That's why your love always felt unfinished, suspended in the air like a prayer unanswered. Imagine two mirrors facing each other. Each one reflects the other into infinity, yet neither image is real. That's the tragedy of this bond. The narcissist doesn't need truth. They need endless reflection. And you, the empath, mistake that reflection for connection, not realizing that what you're feeding is not a heart, but a void. You start to sense it when the silence between you grows heavy. It's not peace, it's hunger. They ask for reassurance without words. Test your loyalty with indifference. Manipulate your empathy with fragments of affection. And you keep responding, hoping that one day your reflection will be enough. But here's what Jung understood. When you shine light into a mirror, the mirror does not become brighter. It merely reflects the light back. No matter how much love you give, it cannot enter them, because the narcissist's inner world is sealed an unconscious fortress guarded by fear of humiliation, abandonment, and insignificance. They do not fear losing love. They fear losing attention. They fear the silence that follows your absence, because that silence contains a truth they cannot bear to hear. Without you, they cease to exist. In Jungian terms, this fear is the terror of psychic death. The narcissist's identity is built entirely on external validation. When the empath withdraws, it's not rejection, it's existential threat. Their shadow, the repressed part of the psyche, rises like smoke through the cracks. You will see it in their eyes. The mask flickers, the charm vanishes, the voice trembles with rage, disguised as confusion. How could you do this to me? That's the moment projection reverses. They accuse you of the very things they have done. You become the villain in their story because they cannot survive being the villain in their own. Jung warned that the shadow, when unintegrated, always seeks a host, and the empath, ever open, becomes that vessel. But the moment you stop reacting, you stop hosting, the infection loses its body. The projection returns home. This is why your quiet exit is the most terrifying act of all. It forces the narcissist to confront their own reflection, not the image they curated, but the emptiness beneath it. To them, your silence is not peace, it is exposure, because silence says, I see who you are, and I refuse to play the role anymore. Silence says, your chaos is no longer my calling. Silence says, you cannot feed on what I've reclaimed. And beneath their fury, their smearing, their desperate attempts to pull you back lies pure terror, not of you, but of themselves. For the first time, they are forced to meet the shadow that your presence once absorbed. You, too, begin to see it differently. You realize that their cruelty was never about you. It was their unconscious trying to regulate its own chaos through domination. And your empathy, your endless giving, was the unconscious attempt to restore balance. But balance cannot exist when one person lives only through reflection. You begin to understand Jung's most haunting insight. The shadow that is not faced becomes the master of fate. You are no longer a reflection in their mirror. You are the one holding it up calmly, silently watching them wrestle with the image they once forced upon you. That is the beginning of individuation, when you stop being a projection and start being a person again. When you stop explaining yourself and let silence speak. When your absence becomes the mirror they cannot shatter, and deep down something shifts. You no longer crave their recognition because you've begun to recognize yourself. You no longer chase closure because you've found clarity. You no longer fight for the relationship because you finally understand. It was never a relationship between two souls. It was a transaction between your light and their void. You step back, not with hate, but with understanding. You realize that compassion without consciousness becomes self-destruction, and that the most loving thing you can do is to stop being their mirror. Because when you walk away in silence, you do not punish them, you free yourself, and you hand them back the only reflection they have left, the one they've spent a lifetime avoiding. Silence is not the absence of power, it is the end of permission. When you stop explaining yourself, something ancient inside you wakes up the part of the soul that no longer negotiates its worth. For so long, your energy has moved outward, explaining, proving, calming, repairing. Now, for the first time, it turns inward. Carl Jung called this movement withdrawal of projections, the sacred act of pulling your energy back from the people and situations that were never meant to contain it. It is not rejection, it is reclamation. Because the moment you stop reacting to the narcissist's chaos, you remove their source of power. They have spent years studying your reactions, each sigh, each tear, each attempt to make peace. Your emotions were their coordinates, your empathy, their compass. They navigated your soul like thieves in familiar territory. But when you fall silent, the map disappears, the labyrinth collapses, their control dissolves into confusion, and their fear begins to speak louder than their arrogance. To the narcissist, your silence is an earthquake. It's not the sound that frightens them, it's the stillness after. Because in that stillness, their reflection vanishes. No audience, no reaction, no mirror, just themselves. And for someone who has lived entirely through performance, that emptiness is unbearable. They will test your silence. They will provoke, distort, and pretend to care anything to pull you back into conversation, into explanation, into reaction. But Jung's wisdom whispers through the noise. What you resist persists, but what you observe dissolves. So you observe. You do not fight. You see their anger not as truth, but as projection. Their accusations bounce off you because they no longer find the old wound to stick to. That's when you realize the narcissist never fed on love. They fed on reaction, and your silence is starvation. But this rebellion is not easy. It feels unnatural, even cruel. To the empathic soul that was trained to explain, to heal, to make others understand. At first, silence feels like guilt. The same guilt the narcissist has conditioned in you for years. They made you believe that love must always explain itself, that kindness must always respond. But Jung would tell you, this guilt is not your enemy. It is the boundary being born. Every time you resist the urge to defend yourself, a new layer of self-respect forms. Every time you sit in silence while they shout into the void, your psyche strengthens its center. This is not detachment, it's individuation, the forming of a self that no longer depends on external approval to exist. In this stage, silence becomes language. It speaks what words cannot. I will not be the stage for your performance. I will not be the reflection for your emptiness. I am no longer yours to define. This quiet defiance shakes the narcissist more than any argument could, because conflict keeps them relevant. Indifference makes them vanish. Jung once said that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. For years, you suffered illegitimately, carrying the emotional burden of someone who refused to carry their own. Now, you allow the legitimate suffering, the grief of letting go, the loneliness of no longer being needed, the mourning of the illusion. You sit with the ache, and something extraordinary begins to happen. The ache starts to change shape. It becomes space. Space for breath, space for peace, space for you. In that quiet, your perception sharpens. You start seeing the narcissist's world for what it always was, a theater of control built on borrowed energy. The love bombing, the silent treatments, the triangulation, all were rituals of power designed to keep you orbiting their void. And yet, as you step back, the illusion loses gravity. You begin to feel weightless, not empty, but free. Jung called this moment the return of the self. The energy that was once scattered through emotional survival begins to flow toward your center. It feels foreign at first, this peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. But it is yours. It always was. The narcissist will sense this shift even from afar. They will feel the absence of your attention, like a sudden drop in temperature. They may accuse you of coldness, arrogance, betrayal. because to them, independence looks like abandonment. But you know now, silence is not abandonment. It is evolution. You start to notice something almost mystical. The world begins to rearrange around your new frequency. The same conversations that once drained you no longer attract you. The same chaos that once hooked you now feels foreign, even repulsive. You are no longer available for pain disguised as love. This is the essence of Jung's individuation, the return of psychic energy from the unconscious back to consciousness. You are no longer the empath who absorbs everything you are, the conscious being who chooses what to hold and what to release. Your silence is not a wall, it's a filter. It allows truth to stay and illusion to pass through. It is not withdrawal, it is discernment. And as you practice this quiet rebellion, you realize the narcissist was never your teacher. They were your mirror. They showed you the parts of yourself you had forgotten, your need to please, your fear of being unloved, your habit of overgiving. And when you stopped feeding their emptiness, you finally began to feed your own soul. Jung would say that consciousness always begins in conflict, and your silence is that conflict resolved not by fighting, but by transcending. You no longer live in their shadow. You no longer dance to the rhythm of their moods. You stand still. And in that stillness, you become untouchable. This is what Jung meant by the heroic act of consciousness. Not winning arguments, not proving your goodness, but daring to be silent in a world that demands noise, daring to walk away without needing to be understood, daring to reclaim your energy without explanation. Your quiet rebellion is not a retreat. It's a return back to your own voice, back to your own rhythm, back to the sacred center that no one can manipulate. Your quiet exit is not disappearance, it's evolution. When you leave without noise, you don't vanish. You return to yourself. The world that once demanded your reaction fades into background static. The faces, the accusations, the endless loops of justification lose their power because you've remembered something the narcissist could never touch: your inner stillness. Carl Jung called this stage, individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. It's when every fragment of your soul that was scattered through survival begins to find its way home. You stop living through reflection and start living from presence. For the first time in years, silence feels safe. You no longer mistake chaos for connection or exhaustion for love. You realize that peace was never something you had to earn. It was simply waiting for you beneath the noise of everyone else's demands. In the mythology of the psyche, Jung often spoke of the hermit archetype, the one who withdraws, not to escape life, but to distill it. The empath's quiet exit is that same withdrawal, a period of purification. You retreat into solitude, not as a punishment, but as a return to source. The air feels different. The body begins to heal. Even your thoughts sound quieter, like waves instead of storms. You start to remember who you were before you became the caretaker of everyone else's wounds. The laughter that once felt far away returns in small bursts. The body loosens. The mind stops rehearsing old conversations. You begin to see that your compassion was never wrong. It was simply unanchored. And now, anchored in self-awareness, it becomes wisdom. Jung warned that modern people suffer most from a loss of soul. The narcissist, in their emptiness, lives in that loss permanently. But the empath, the one who feels too much, loves too deeply, can find their way back through consciousness. When you withdraw your energy from the collective unconscious, from all the noise, the projection, the manipulation, you begin to regenerate. Your empathy transforms from reaction into radiance. You no longer absorb others' pain. You illuminate their potential. You no longer carry their shadows. You hold your own. This is what Jung called the rebirth of the self. When the light no longer depends on mirrors to shine, it shines because it remembers itself as the source. The world might misunderstand this stage. They'll call you distant, detached, cold. But you'll know the truth. You are not cold. You are clear. You are not detached. You are discerning. And clarity feels nothing like arrogance. It feels like freedom. You begin to create again, not for approval, but for expression. You love again, not to be needed, but to be whole. You help again, not from guilt, but from groundedness. Jung once wrote, "A tree that reaches to heaven must have roots that reach down to hell." You have gone down. You have seen the darkness, not to drown in it, but to grow roots strong enough to hold your light. Now, that light no longer flickers. It burns steady. You no longer fear your shadow. You've integrated it. You no longer chase validation. You've outgrown it. You no longer seek peace. You are peace. This is what the narcissist never understood. You didn't leave to punish them. You left to protect your evolution. You didn't vanish to prove a point. You vanished to reclaim your power. You didn't go silent because you were weak. You went silent because your soul finally found its voice. That voice speaks without words now through your presence, your clarity, your calm refusal to re-enter chaos. It speaks in the way you move through life, softly but unshakably. It speaks every time you choose peace over performance, truth over validation, solitude over noise. And in that silence, you've become something rare, a conscious empath, untouchable, luminous, complete. Your quiet exit has transformed into something sacred. It is no longer withdrawal. It is creation. Every boundary you set becomes an act of self-respect. Every silence becomes a kind of prayer. Every no becomes a doorway to a deeper yes. The narcissist fears your quiet exit because it exposes the one truth they've spent their whole life avoiding, that your energy was never theirs to own. It was always a loan from the universe, meant to be reclaimed. And now, in your stillness, it has returned to its rightful home, yourself. So, if you've walked this path, if you've felt the exhaustion, the silence, the slow rebuilding of your own soul, know this. You are not disappearing. You are distilling. You are not abandoning anyone. You are simply remembering who you are when you are no longer needed by those who refuse to grow. And when the world calls you back again, because it will, you'll return differently. Not as the rescuer, but as the reminder. Not as the mirror, but as the light. You'll give, but never bleed. You'll love, but never lose yourself. You'll walk among the unconscious without being absorbed by it. You will have become what Jung called a symbol of the self, a living embodiment of integration. The empath no longer defined by others' pain, but refined by their own awareness. If these words found you at the right moment, if you felt something in your chest loosen as you read them, it means your awakening has already begun. Don't rush it, don't fight it, just stay conscious. This silence you've entered is not an ending, it's initiation. If you want to explore Jung's teachings deeper, the individuation process, the integration of the shadow, the psychology of awakening, you're not alone. There's a community here for those who feel too much, see too deeply, and refuse to go back to sleep. Like this video if it spoke to your soul. Share it with someone still caught in the cycle of reflection and control. And subscribe, not for content, but for consciousness. Each week, we explore Jung's timeless insights and the hidden architecture of the human psyche. Until then, stay conscious and protect your light.